After 2 years of being kept by billionaire heiress Penelope Parker, living in her penthouse and following her every demand, I watched her empire crumble in a single day. The woman who once controlled my entire existence, what I wore, where I went, even who I could speak to, was now standing in her empty mansion, staring at bankruptcy papers with dead eyes. As she reached for the bottle of pills on her marble countertop, preparing to end it all, I made a decision that shocked us both. Instead of walking away free like I'd dreamed of for years, I grabbed her wrist and said the words that would change everything. "You're not going anywhere, Penelope. Now it's my turn to be in charge." What I thought would be sweet revenge turned into something more twisted, because when I made my former sugar mommy into my personal maid, she didn't just submit, she became completely obsessed with me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The penthouse on Maple Avenue had always felt like a golden cage, and I was the prized bird inside it. Penelope Parker, at 37, was everything the tabloids said she was: ruthless, brilliant, and devastatingly beautiful. As the heiress to the Parker electronics empire, she commanded respect from boardrooms to bedroom suites, and for the past 2 years, she'd commanded me. I was 25 when she first spotted me at a university career fair, struggling to pay for my business degree while working 3 part-time jobs. "You have potential," she'd said, her emerald eyes studying me like I was a stock portfolio she was considering. Within a week, I was living in her penthouse, wearing designer clothes she picked out, and following a schedule she'd meticulously planned. My life became a series of controlled experiences. She decided when I could leave the building, monitored my phone calls, and even had her security detail follow me during my rare solo outings. "I wasn't allowed to work. Why would you need to when I provide everything?" she'd say while transferring another generous sum into my account. She chose my friends, my activities, even my haircuts. I was her project, her possession, her perfectly crafted companion. The control was suffocating, but I won't lie, the lifestyle was intoxicating. Private jets to Aspen, front row seats at fashion shows, dinners that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She lavished expensive gifts on me constantly. A Rolex for my birthday, a Tesla just because she liked how I looked driving it, custom suits from Milan that made me feel like royalty. But underneath the luxury, I was slowly losing myself. I couldn't remember the last time I'd made a decision without considering what Penelope would think. When I tried to resist, like the time I wanted to visit my old college friends, she'd become cold and distant, cutting off my access to credit cards and making me feel like an ungrateful brat until I apologized and complied. The tracker in my phone wasn't hidden. She was open about monitoring my location. "It's for your safety," she'd explain, though we both knew it was about control. She had cameras in every room except the bathroom, claiming it was standard security for someone of her status. The penthouse had become my beautiful prison, and Penelope was both my captor and my provider. Then everything changed on a Tuesday morning in October. I woke up to find Penelope in her home office, surrounded by legal documents and empty wine bottles. Her normally perfect appearance was disheveled, hair uncombed, mascara smudged, still wearing yesterday's silk blouse. She was staring at her laptop screen with an expression I'd never seen before: complete defeat. "What's wrong?" I asked, genuinely concerned, despite our complicated relationship. She looked up at me with hollow eyes. "It's over, Landon. Everything is over." The news broke an hour later. Parker Electronics had been implicated in a massive fraud scandal involving falsified environmental reports and bribed officials. The company's stock plummeted 90% overnight. Federal investigators had frozen her assets, and lawsuits were being filed by the hour. The empire that had taken 3 generations to build was crumbling in real time. Penelope sat in her leather chair, motionless as news anchors discussed her downfall on every channel. Her phone rang constantly. Lawyers, accountants, board members, but she ignored them all. The woman who had once controlled my every breath couldn't even control her own trembling hands. "They're going to take everything," she whispered. "The penthouse, the cars, the accounts. I'll have nothing left." I watched her open a prescription bottle and pour pills into her palm. "Ambien, enough to solve her problems permanently. Even my trust fund is tied up in company assets," she continued, her voice eerily calm. "I can't even afford a decent lawyer. I'll be facing prison time, and I'll lose what little dignity I have left." She raised the pills toward her mouth, and something inside me snapped. Not compassion exactly, but something more complex. This woman had controlled every aspect of my life for 2 years, had made me feel powerless and dependent. But seeing her about to give up, about to take the easy way out while I was left to figure out my own future, it filled me with an unexpected rage. I lunged forward and knocked the pills from her hand, scattering them across the marble floor. "What are you doing?" she gasped. "You're not going anywhere, Penelope," I said, surprised by the authority in my own voice. "You don't get to just check out and leave me to clean up this mess." For the first time in 2 years, I saw genuine surprise in her eyes. She wasn't used to me taking charge of anything, let alone her life or death decisions. "I have money," I continued, my mind racing with possibilities I'd never dared consider. "My trust fund from my grandfather's construction business. You never touched it because you wanted me completely dependent on you. Ironic, isn't it?" She stared at me, waiting for the punchline. "I'm buying your debts, Penelope, whatever I can cover. And in return, you're going to work for me." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. The woman who had dictated my every move was now looking at me with something that might have been respect or fear. "You want revenge," she said quietly. I smiled, feeling a surge of power I'd forgotten was possible. "I want justice. You spent 2 years teaching me how to be controlled. Now it's my turn to be the teacher." Penelope Parker, billionaire heiress and my former captor, slowly nodded her head in submission. "What do you want me to do?" "Everything," I said. "And we're starting right now." The transformation began immediately. I used my grandfather's trust fund, nearly $800,000 I'd inherited but never touched, to settle Penelope's most pressing debts and legal fees. It wasn't enough to restore her empire, but it bought us time and kept her out of jail. "From now on, you follow my rules," I told her as I handed her a simple black dress, nothing like the designer gowns that used to fill her walk-in closet. "You'll wear what I choose, eat what I prepare, and go where I allow." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I made her download a tracking app on her phone, the same one she'd used to monitor me. I changed all the passwords on the remaining functional devices in the penthouse, and set up parental controls on her laptop. Every humiliation she'd put me through, I was now returning with interest. "Your first job," I announced, "is to learn how to be useful. You're going to clean this place from top to bottom." Penelope had never cleaned anything in her life. Watching her struggle with a vacuum cleaner was both satisfying and surreal. She kept looking at me with this strange expression, not quite resentment, but something more complex. Almost like she was studying me with the same intensity she'd once used to analyze business deals. I made her wear a maid's uniform. I ordered online, complete with an apron and comfortable shoes. The sight of the former electronics heiress dusting furniture she'd probably never noticed before filled me with a satisfaction I hadn't expected. But what surprised me more was how completely she submitted to it. "Does this meet your standards, Mr. Thorne?" she asked after cleaning the kitchen, using my formal name in a way that sent an unexpected thrill through me. "Again," I said simply. "And this time, don't forget behind the appliances." She nodded without complaint and started over. This wasn't the resistance I'd expected from someone who'd once fired executives for minor mistakes. She was being obedient, almost eager to please. I established a daily routine that mirrored the rigid schedule she'd once imposed on me. She woke at 6 a.m., prepared my breakfast, cleaned the penthouse, and spent her afternoons doing whatever household tasks I assigned. Evenings were reserved for personal time, but she had to ask permission for everything. What to watch on TV, what to eat for dinner, even when to use the bathroom. The most striking change was how she looked at me. Before, her gaze had been possessive, controlling, like I was an object she owned. Now there was something different in her emerald eyes, an intensity that made me uncomfortable. She watched my every movement with an almost scientific fascination, as if she was memorizing everything I did. "You've changed," she said one evening, while polishing my shoes, a task I'd assigned purely to see if she'd do it. "Have I? You're more confident, more decisive. Before, you always seemed like you were waiting for permission to exist." I looked down at her kneeling beside my chair, her manicured hands carefully working the leather. The position should have felt empowering, but something about her expression made me uneasy. "Maybe I just needed the right motivation," I replied. She smiled, not the cold calculating smile from before, but something warmer and infinitely more disturbing. "I think I prefer you this way." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The comment stuck with me. I'd expected anger, resentment, or at least begrudging compliance. But Penelope seemed genuinely content with our new arrangement. She performed every task with meticulous attention to detail, often going beyond what I'd requested. When I criticized her cleaning, she'd apologize and immediately redo the work. When I complimented her cooking, which was surprisingly good for someone who'd never prepared her own meals, she'd beam with pride like a student receiving praise from a favorite teacher. "I've been thinking about redecorating," I mentioned casually one afternoon. Before I could elaborate, she'd already pulled out a notepad and was taking notes. "What style were you considering?" I could research color schemes and furniture options. "I know several designers who might work within our budget constraints." Our budget constraints. She was already thinking of us as a unit. I gave her a budget of $5,000 and told her to transform the penthouse's sterile elegance into something more comfortable. Within a week, she'd turned the cold museum-like space into something that actually felt like a home. Warm lighting, comfortable furniture, and personal touches that somehow perfectly matched my taste, even though I'd never explicitly told her what I liked. "How did you know?" I asked, running my hand over a leather armchair that felt like it had been made specifically for me. "I've been watching you for 2 years, she said simply. "I know what makes you comfortable." The admission should have felt creepy, but there was something about the way she said it, not stalkerish, but almost devoted. Like she'd been conducting a study on my preferences, not to control me, but to serve me better. That night, as I lay in the master bedroom, while she slept on the couch, another role reversal from our previous arrangement, I heard her talking to herself in the living room. I crept to the door to listen. "He likes his coffee at exactly 170 degrees, she was whispering. "He prefers natural light in the morning, but warm lamps in the evening. He's more relaxed when there are plants around, and he unconsciously smiles when he hears jazz music." She was cataloging my preferences, like they were precious data points. The dedication in her voice was both flattering and deeply unsettling. I was beginning to realize that making Penelope Parker my maid hadn't broken her. It had given her a new purpose, and she was embracing that purpose with the same intensity she'd once brought to building her business empire. The question was, what exactly was she building now? 3 months into our new arrangement, the harsh realities of our situation began to surface. My trust fund, while substantial, was depleting faster than I'd anticipated. Penelope's legal fees alone were consuming thousands every week, and the penthouse's maintenance costs were astronomical. We were living in a bubble that was slowly deflating. "We need to discuss our financial situation," I told Penelope over breakfast. Scrambled eggs with fresh herbs that she'd somehow made taste like a 5-star restaurant meal. She set down her coffee cup with the same precision she applied to everything now. "I've been tracking our expenses," she said, producing a detailed spreadsheet from seemingly nowhere. "At our current burn rate, we have approximately 4 months before we'll need to make significant changes." I stared at the spreadsheet, impressed despite myself. She'd categorized every expense, identified areas where we could cut costs, and even researched alternative housing options. When had she had time to do all this? "You've been busy," I observed. "I wanted to be useful," she replied, and there was that strange intensity in her eyes again. "I thought if I could help solve our problems, you might." "Might what?" She looked down at her hands. "You might be proud of me." The admission was so unexpectedly vulnerable that I didn't know how to respond. This was Penelope Parker, who had once made Fortune 500 CEOs nervous. Now she was seeking my approval like an eager intern. "Show me what you've found," I said, instead of addressing her comment. Her research was thorough. She'd identified a modest apartment in Brookhaven Heights, a middle-class neighborhood about an hour from downtown. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and rent that was less than 1/10 of what we were spending on the penthouse. "It's not what you're used to," she said carefully. "But it's clean and safe, and there's a small garden where I could grow herbs for cooking." I noticed she'd said I could grow herbs, not we could. Everything was framed around how she could serve me better, even in reduced circumstances. "Let's look at it this weekend," I decided. The apartment was a shock to my system. After years of luxury, the narrow hallways and basic fixtures felt claustrophobic. But Penelope walked through the space like she was touring a palace, already planning improvements. "The kitchen has good natural light," she murmured, running her fingers along the laminate countertops. "I could make this work. The bedroom is small, But if I take the living room, you'll have privacy and— You're assuming we're taking it, I interrupted. Aren't we? She turned to face me, and I saw something desperate in her expression. Unless you're planning to. Planning to what? Leave me, she whispered. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on the power dynamic between us, that I hadn't considered how our arrangement might look from her perspective. To Penelope, I wasn't just her new employer, I was her entire world. With her old life destroyed and her assets frozen, I was the only stability she had left. I'm not going anywhere, I said, surprising myself with how quickly I'd responded. We're in this together. The relief on her face was so intense, it was almost painful to watch. She actually sagged against the kitchen counter, as if my words had physically held her up. We moved to Brookhaven Heights, 2 weeks later. The transition was jarring. Our neighbors were teachers, mechanics, and retail workers, people who had no idea they were living next to a former billionaire heiress, who was now essentially working as a live-in domestic servant. Penelope adapted with unsettling ease. She learned the bus routes, found the best grocery stores, and somehow made our tiny apartment feel comfortable and inviting. She painted the walls in warm colors, hung inexpensive art that perfectly matched my taste, and turned the small balcony into a thriving herb garden. But it was her behavior toward me that really changed. The careful obedience from the penthouse days had evolved into something more intense. She anticipated my needs before I voiced them, kept detailed notes about my preferences, and seemed to take genuine pleasure in taking care of me. Your laundry is folded and put away, she'd report each evening, standing at attention like she was giving a military briefing. Dinner will be ready in 15 minutes. I've recorded that documentary you mentioned wanting to watch. You don't have to report everything to me, I told her one night. I like to, she replied. I like knowing that I've made your day easier. The strangest part was how she'd begun referring to our situation. She never called herself my maid or employee. Instead, she'd say things like I'm taking care of the house, or I'm managing our home, as if we were a couple with a very traditional division of labor. I started noticing other unsettling behaviors. She'd position herself where she could watch me even when doing other tasks. If I left the apartment, she'd find excuses to text me throughout the day, asking about dinner preferences, or whether I needed anything from the store. When I came home, she'd be waiting by the door with an eagerness that seemed excessive for someone asking about my day. Do you have any friends in the neighborhood? I asked her one evening. Why would I need friends? She replied, genuinely puzzled by the question. For company, for conversation, for a life outside of this apartment. She looked at me like I'd suggested something absurd. This is my life, Landon. Taking care of you, taking care of our home. This is what I want to do. The conviction in her voice was absolute. She wasn't just saying what she thought I wanted to hear, she genuinely believed it. That night, I found her organizing my closet by color and season, a task I'd never asked her to do. She was humming softly to herself, and there was a contentment in her expression that I'd never seen during her corporate days. Penelope, I said, and she immediately straightened up, giving me her full attention. Yes. Are you happy? She considered the question with the seriousness she'd once reserved for multi-million-dollar deals. I've never been happier, she said finally. I spent 40 years trying to control everything around me, and I was miserable. Now I just focus on taking care of you, and everything makes sense. I stared at her, kneeling on our apartment floor, surrounded by my neatly arranged clothes, and realized that I'd created something I hadn't intended. This wasn't just role reversal anymore. It was something deeper and more complicated. Penelope Parker, former billionaire heiress, hadn't just accepted her new role as my domestic servant. She'd embraced it so completely that it had become her entire identity. And the look in her eyes when she talked about taking care of me was becoming less like devotion and more like obsession. 6 months into our new life in Brookhaven Heights, I realized I needed to find work. My trust fund was nearly depleted, and Penelope's legal fees showed no signs of decreasing. But the bigger problem was Penelope herself. Her behavior was becoming increasingly concerning, and I needed space to think clearly about our situation. I'm going to start looking for a job, I announced over breakfast. The coffee mug slipped from her hands, shattering against the kitchen floor. For a moment, she just stared at the broken pieces, then immediately dropped to her knees to clean them up. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I'll replace it. I'll be more careful. Penelope, it's just a mug. But you were drinking from it, she replied, as if that made it irreplaceable. Where will you be working? What kind of schedule? Will you need me to pack lunches? The barrage of questions felt suffocating. I don't know yet. I haven't even started looking. She finished cleaning up the broken ceramic with meticulous care, then stood and smoothed down her apron, a gesture that had become habitual. I could look for work too. I have management experience. And the word came out sharper than I'd intended. I mean, someone needs to maintain the household. That's your responsibility. Relief flooded her features. Of course, you're right. I'll keep everything perfect for when you come home. The way she said come home made it sound like I'd be returning from war, rather than a regular job. I started my search quietly, using the public library's computers, so Penelope wouldn't see my browsing history. Her monitoring of my activities had become subtle but constant. She'd organize my things, and somehow always know if I'd moved something, or she'd casually mention details about my day that I hadn't shared with her. After 2 weeks of searching, I found an opportunity that seemed perfect. Assistant manager at a sporting goods store in Westfield, the next town over. The pay was decent, the hours were regular, and it was far enough away that I wouldn't accidentally run into anyone from our neighborhood. I got the job, but I didn't tell Penelope the truth about it. It's a consulting position, I lied, adjusting my new polo shirt with the store logo carefully hidden. Helping a small business with their operational efficiency. Very boring stuff. How long will you be gone each day? She asked, and I noticed she was gripping the kitchen counter so tightly her knuckles were white. Standard business hours, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. She nodded, but I could see her mind racing. I'll have lunch ready when you come home, and dinner, and I'll make sure the apartment is spotless. You won't have to worry about anything domestic. Penelope, you don't have to. I want to, she interrupted. I need to be useful while you're away. My first day at Westfield Sports was a relief. Dealing with inventory and customer service felt wonderfully normal after months of navigating Penelope's increasingly intense devotion. My manager, Kelvin Albright, was a straightforward guy in his 40s, who treated me like a regular employee. No psychological analysis, no excessive attention to my preferences. You're a quick learner, he said, after I'd successfully handled a difficult customer return. Most people take weeks to get comfortable with our system. I smiled, realizing I'd forgotten what normal professional praise felt like. Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity. When I came home that evening, Penelope was waiting by the door like an excited puppy. She'd changed into a fresh dress, reapplied her makeup, and the entire apartment smelled like garlic and herbs. How was your first day? She asked, taking my jacket before I could protest. Good, productive. Tell me everything, she said, leading me to the dining table, which was set with our nicest dishes and lit candles. I gave her a carefully edited version of my day, focusing on the fictional consulting work rather than retail reality. She listened with an intensity that was both flattering and unnerving, asking follow-up questions that showed she was memorizing every detail. The client sounds challenging, she said. You'll handle them perfectly though. You're so good with difficult people. The compliment made me uncomfortable, because I could see how much she meant it. In her eyes, I was this perfect, capable person who could do no wrong. This pattern continued for weeks. I'd leave for my real job at the sporting goods store, spend 8 hours in blessed normalcy, then return home to Penelope's elaborate productions. She treated each evening like I was returning from a dangerous mission, with carefully prepared meals and detailed debriefings about my fictional day. But her behavior during my absences was becoming more problematic. I started finding evidence of extensive cleaning, not just tidying, but deep obsessive cleaning. She'd organized my sock drawer by color gradient, alphabetized our spice rack, and somehow made our tiny apartment more sterile than the old penthouse. Did you leave the apartment today? I asked one evening, noticing that she seemed even more pale than usual. Why would I need to? She replied. Everything I need is here. Fresh air, exercise, human contact. She looked genuinely puzzled. I get fresh air when I water the herbs on the balcony, and I talk to you every evening. That's all the human contact I need. The isolation she was imposing on herself was alarming.
But every time I suggested she find activities or friends, she'd deflect by focusing on some task she needed to complete for me. Then everything changed on a Thursday in November. I was helping a customer find running shoes when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Well, Landon Thorne, if I'm not mistaken. I turned to see Everly Hayes, a woman I recognized from Penelope's old social circle. She was tall, elegant, and looking at me with predatory amusement. "Miss Hayes," I said carefully. "Please, call me Everly. We're practically old friends, aren't we? I've heard such interesting stories about you and dear Penelope." My stomach dropped. "I'm sorry, but I'm working right now." "Oh, I can see that," she said, her eyes taking in my employee polo and name tag. "How quaint. And here I thought you were living off Penelope's remaining assets. Silly me." She picked up a tennis racket and examined it with exaggerated interest. "You know, I've been wondering what happened to our fallen heiress. The last anyone heard, she'd completely disappeared. Some people think she fled the country." "I wouldn't know," I said, but my voice sounded strained even to me. Everly set down the racket and looked directly at me. "I'm having a little gathering this weekend. Nothing fancy, just some of Penelope's old friends, reminiscing about the good times. I don't suppose you'd know how to reach her." The question was casual, but there was steel underneath it. Everly Hayes had been one of Penelope's business rivals, always circling like a vulture whenever Parker Electronics hit a rough patch. Now that Penelope was truly down, Everly was clearly looking to finish her off. "Like I said, I wouldn't know how to reach her." "Of course not," Everly smiled. "Well, if you happen to run into her, do tell her I'm thinking about her. We have so much to catch up on." She left without buying anything, but I knew this wasn't over. Somehow, Everly had tracked me down, which meant she knew more about our situation than she was letting on. I spent the rest of my shift in a panic. If Everly Hayes was sniffing around, it meant others might be too. Penelope had enemies from her business days, people who would love to see her humiliated further, or who might want to settle old scores. When I got home, Penelope was waiting with her usual enthusiasm, but I was too distracted to appreciate her efforts. "You seem tense," she observed, studying my face with that unnerving intensity. "Did something happen with your consulting work?" I almost told her the truth, but something stopped me. If Penelope knew that her old life was trying to intrude on our new one, she might panic. Or worse, she might try to protect me in ways that would draw even more attention. "Just a difficult client," I said instead. "Nothing I can't handle." She accepted this explanation, but I caught her watching me more closely throughout the evening. During dinner, while I was lost in thought about Everly's threats, I realized Penelope had been talking to me. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I asked if you needed me to do anything special tomorrow. "You seem worried about work." There was something in her voice, a eagerness that went beyond normal concern. It was like she was hoping I'd give her some problem to solve, some way to prove her usefulness. "No, everything's fine," I said, but I could see she didn't believe me. That night, I lay awake thinking about Everly Hayes, and what she might want, but I also found myself thinking about Penelope. Asleep on the couch in the living room, she'd chosen to sleep there instead of the second bedroom, claiming it made her feel closer to me. I was beginning to realize that our isolated little world was more fragile than I'd thought, and if someone like Everly Hayes was determined to find us, it was only a matter of time before our carefully constructed new life came crashing down. The question was, when that happened, which version of Penelope would emerge? The broken woman who needed saving, or the obsessive devotee who'd do anything to keep me in her life? The answer came sooner than I expected.
I arrived home from work the following Friday to find our apartment door standing wide open. My heart stopped as I rushed inside, calling Penelope's name. The living room was in chaos, furniture overturned, our few valuables scattered across the floor, and in the center of it all sat Penelope, perfectly calm in her maid's dress, holding a kitchen knife. "Welcome home," she said with that unsettling smile. "We have a visitor." That's when I saw Everly Hayes bound to one of our dining chairs with what looked like extension cords. Her mouth was taped shut, but her eyes were wide with terror above the silver strip. "Penelope, what the hell did you do?" "She came here looking for you," Penelope explained matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "She said she wanted to make me a business proposition. Something about revealing our location to your family in exchange for information about my hidden assets. My blood ran cold. I'd never told Penelope that my family had been looking for me. They'd grown concerned when I'd suddenly stopped responding to their calls after moving in with her years ago. She also mentioned that she knew about your real job. Penelope continued, her grip tightening on the knife handle. How you've been lying to me about the consulting work. Everly made muffled sounds behind the tape, her eyes darting between us frantically. Penelope, you need to let her go. This is kidnapping. This is protecting us, she interrupted, standing up with fluid grace. She was going to destroy everything we've built. She was going to take you away from me. The possessiveness in her voice was absolute terrifying. This wasn't the broken heiress I'd rescued, or even the devoted servant she'd become. This was something else entirely, something that had been building behind her careful submission for months. I would never leave you, I said carefully, keeping my voice calm, but you were planning to, weren't you? She tilted her head, studying me with clinical precision. The secret job, the lies about consulting work. You're building a life outside of this apartment, outside of us. I was trying to support us financially. We needed the money. We needed honesty. She moved closer, and I could see the depth of her obsession burning in her emerald eyes. I've given you everything, Landon. I've made myself into exactly what you wanted. I've erased everything I used to be, and rebuilt myself around making you happy. Everly was making increasingly desperate sounds, but Penelope ignored her completely, as if she were just another piece of furniture. And it worked, didn't it? Penelope continued. You were happy. We were perfect together until she showed up, trying to drag us back into the old world. Penelope, please put down the knife. She knows about your job, which means she's been watching us, watching you. The blade caught the apartment's fluorescent light as she gestured. Do you know what she offered me, Landon? She said she'd help me reclaim my fortune if I gave her information about your new identity and whereabouts. My mouth went dry. What did you tell her? Penelope's smile was cold and beautiful and absolutely terrifying. I told her that Penelope Parker died in that penthouse 6 months ago. There's only me now, the woman who belongs to you. The complete surrender of her former identity should have been touching, but in this context, it was horrifying. She'd erased herself so completely that protecting our relationship had become her only remaining instinct. We can work this out, I said, taking a careful step forward. At first you have to let Everly go. No, the word was final, absolute. She'll just come back, or she'll send others. The only way to keep you safe, to keep us safe, is to make sure she can never threaten us again. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Penelope, you're not a killer. I'm whatever you need me to be, she replied simply. That's what love is. In that moment, looking at the woman I'd turned into my devoted servant, I realized the horrible truth. I'd broken Penelope Parker so completely that she'd rebuilt herself as something dangerous. Her obsession with me wasn't just psychological, it had become her entire operating system. Everly made one more desperate sound, and Penelope's attention snapped to her like a predator noticing movement. She's been quiet long enough, Penelope said, raising the knife. I think it's time to solve this problem permanently. Everything slowed down. I saw Penelope's muscles tense, saw Everly's eyes widen in absolute terror, and realized that the woman I'd thought I was controlling had been controlling the situation all along. She'd been waiting for a threat to emerge, so she could prove the depths of her devotion. Stop! I shouted, lunging forward, just as Penelope brought the knife down. The blade missed Everly by inches, embedding itself in the wooden chair back as I tackled Penelope to the ground. We struggled briefly, but she was stronger than I'd expected. Months of obsessive physical maintenance had kept her in excellent shape. You don't understand, she gasped as I pinned her arms. I have to protect you. I have to protect us. It's the only thing I'm good for anymore. Looking into her eyes, I saw the truth she'd been hiding behind her perfect submission. Penelope Parker hadn't been tamed. She'd been transformed into something far more dangerous than she'd ever been as a ruthless businesswoman. And I was the only thing standing between her twisted love and complete disaster. The silence in our destroyed apartment was deafening. I held Penelope pinned beneath me, both of us breathing hard, while Everly Hayes remained bound to the chair, her eyes darting between us in terror. The kitchen knife lay embedded in the wooden chair back, inches from where Everly's head had been moments before. "Let me up," Penelope said quietly, but there was no fight left in her voice. "I won't hurt her." I studied her face, looking for any sign of the dangerous obsession that had nearly turned her into a killer. What I saw instead was something unexpected: clarity. For the first time in months, Penelope's expression wasn't filtered through the lens of her devoted servant persona. Cautiously, I released her and stood up. She sat up slowly, smoothing down her maid's dress with automatic precision, then looked directly at Everly. "I'm going to remove the tape," she told our captive. "If you scream, the neighbors will call the police, and we'll all have much bigger problems to deal with." Everly nodded frantically. Penelope carefully peeled away the silver tape, and Everly immediately gasped for air. "You're completely insane," Everly wheezed. "Both of you. I could have you arrested for kidnapping, assault." "But you won't," Penelope interrupted calmly, working on the extension cords that bound Everly's hands. "Because that would require explaining why you were here in the first place, and we both know your intentions weren't exactly legal either." As the restraints fell away, Everly rubbed her wrists and glared at us. "You think this is over? You think you can just—" "Yes, I do think it's over," Penelope said, sitting back on her heels. "Because I'm going to give you exactly what you came here for." Both Everly and I stared at her. "There are approximately $2.7 million in assets hidden in offshore accounts that the federal investigators never found," Penelope continued, matter-of-factly. "Account numbers, passwords, everything you need to access them. Consider it payment for your silence about our location." Everly's greed was immediately visible. "How do I know you're not lying?" Penelope pulled out her phone and showed Everly a banking app I'd never seen before. "Transfer in progress. Check your email in about 10 minutes. I watched this exchange in stunned silence. Penelope had just casually revealed that she'd been hiding millions of dollars while I'd been working retail and depleting my trust fund to support us. "Why now?" I asked once Everly had left, clutching her phone and checking her email obsessively as she hurried away from our apartment. Penelope was methodically cleaning up the overturned furniture, her movements precise and careful. "Because maintaining the fantasy was more important than the money. Until today." "What fantasy?" She paused in her cleaning and looked at me with those emerald eyes that had haunted my dreams for months. "The fantasy that you needed me to be helpless, that you wanted to be my savior and my master." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's not, isn't it?" She set a lamp back on its table and plugged it in. "You liked having power over me, Landon. You liked seeing the great Penelope Parker kneeling on your apartment floor, wearing an apron and asking permission for everything. I wanted to deny it, but the truth was uncomfortable and undeniable. Maybe at first. But that's not what this became." "No," she agreed, smoothing out a throw pillow. "It became something much more interesting." She sat down on our repaired couch and patted the cushion beside her. Hesitantly, I joined her. "I want to tell you something," she said. "The night you saved me from those pills, when you decided to take control, that was the first time in my entire life that someone had seen me at my absolute worst and chosen to stay." Penelope let me finish. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Everyone else in my life wanted something from me. Money, connections, status. Even when I was controlling your life in the penthouse, it was because I was terrified you'd leave if I didn't give you enough reasons to stay." She turned to face me fully. "But you stayed when I had nothing to offer except problems. You stayed when I was broken and pathetic, and had lost everything that made me valuable to other people. That's because I stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. "Because you what?" "Because I care about you," I admitted. "Not the powerful heiress version, or the devoted servant version. Just you." Something in her expression softened. "The woman who just almost committed murder to protect you." "That was extreme," I said carefully. "But I understand why you did it." She laughed, but it wasn't the cold laugh from her corporate days, or the eager-to-please laugh from her servant period. It was genuine, with a hint of the darkness that would always be part of her. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now that all our carefully constructed roles have collapsed." I thought about it. The power dynamics between us had been complicated from the beginning, first with her controlling me, then with me controlling her,
and finally with both of us trapped in patterns that neither of us had fully chosen. "I have a proposal," I said. "I'm listening." "Partners. Real partners. No more games about who's in charge. No more pretending to be something we're not. And if I occasionally have violent impulses toward people who threaten you, we'll work on healthier coping mechanisms." She smiled, and this time it was completely genuine. "I can live with that arrangement." "Good," I said, "because I'm tired of having to choose between being your master or your victim. I'd rather just be your partner." She leaned against me, and for the first time since this whole twisted relationship began, it felt natural, rather than performative. "There is one condition," she said. "What's that?" "I keep cooking. You're terrible at it, and I actually enjoy taking care of you, when it's my choice, rather than my entire identity." I laughed, wrapping my arm around her. "Deal. But no more maid uniforms, unless you actually want to wear them." "We'll see," she said with a mischievous glint in her eye. "I might be more attached to certain aspects of our arrangement than you realize." 3 months later, we moved to a better apartment across town, paid for with Penelope's recovered assets. She started a consulting firm, helping other executives navigate corporate scandals, while I finished my business degree and became her business partner in the most literal sense. Our relationship was no longer about control or power or elaborate role-playing games. It was built on something much more solid, the knowledge that we'd seen each other at our absolute worst and chosen to stay anyway. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch her watching me with that intense focus that used to make me nervous. But now I understood it differently. It wasn't obsession. It was the concentrated attention of someone who'd almost lost everything and was determined to appreciate what she had. "I love you," she said one evening as we worked side by side on a difficult case. "I love you too," I replied, and meant it completely. She smiled and went back to her laptop, humming softly to herself. The sound was content, peaceful, and nothing like the desperate devotion that had once defined her. We'd both learned something important. The difference between being controlled and being cherished, between being obsessed and being committed. And that difference had made all the difference in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.